Welcome to Permaculture Vision's session on microclimates. Microclimates are little pockets of climate that are different to the surrounding climate. Once you know how they are different, you can replicate this in your designs to your advantage, and in other cases, you can lessen the harmful effects. Thinking back to the last time I was caught out in foul weather, I sheltered from the rain with my back to the wind, and I tried to catch a few beams of sunshine on my face to keep me warm. We all know instinctively how to shelter, but we don't all know how to use nature to our advantage. How do we feel cooler by fanning our face? It's because air loses energy when it's moving. So if we keep air still and have a bit of sunlight on the air, it actually gains energy. And this is how we can be warmed by air. Alternatively, when we trap air between two panes of glass, it's still again. It can't move, but it can actually act as insulation. So there are many external energy sources that will influence a site. And you can see here there's a simple graphic representation of those energies. There's a big solar light window on the right-hand side of this site. There's some solar heat generally, and it's a small window for that site because it only comes between, let's say, 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. in winter. There's the fire that could be an energy source, but it'd be very hard to make good use of that. There's wind, there's thermal mass, a little bit to the left there and in the house. There's more wind, which is cooler, so it's a blue wind there. And there's noise from the street. In the central area, you can see that the cool air could be ponding there in the same way that water ponds. I suggest you pause now and you have a look and think about the energy sources on your site. We could break up the energies into sectors. We could say, well, one energy source is the animals because they're doing kinetic things like eating pests and weeds, and they're producing chemical energy in their fertilizer, and they provide healthy eggs for the family, which is also another form of chemical energy. But they can be damaging to the crops, and so there's another type of kinetic energy which could be avoided with fencing. If you look through this table, you can see different types of positive and negative effects of the energy. Thermal mass is something that a lot of people don't think about. You're not likely to stand in an area and feel the thermal mass. Unless you actually touch a rock wall or you sit on a rock bench, you're not going to feel the effects of the thermal mass. But when you walk into a mud brick home, it's something very comforting about it. And it's usually because of the thermal mass. Not that it's always warmer, not that it's always colder, but it's fairly constant in its temperature. Another energy source that is often overlooked is mist, condensation, humidity. Now, a site often gets more water through condensation than through rainfall. We have 6 factors that create microclimates. Let's look at the first factor, sunlight. Sunlight is one of the biggest effects of microclimate. Sunlight encourages photosynthesis, so the plants grow bigger, the leaves get bigger, the leaves can actually become a little bit reflective of the sunlight. As the plant grows, it starts to transpire, and the moisture inside the soil is taken up like a straw into the leaves and then breathed out into the atmosphere. But you know, as plants start to die back and their leaves fall, and the roots might die back and plants move around a bit, then they actually create soil. So solar radiation is useful for seed germination. It encourages the bees to pollinate because the flowers stay open in the warmth of the sun. And it's also useful for ripening. but too much solar radiation is pretty common. So it's another management issue. The sun changes its angle. Well, the sun doesn't move, but the Earth does. It rotates. So in summer, the sun will be overhead, whereas in winter, when the Earth has moved, the sun appears to be lower, and so you have less solar penetration. So the ideal settlement would be one that gets enough sun, and especially in winter, and has a little bit of protection from behind so that any sunlight warmth is not blown away. If you have a look at the effects of shadows, that on the right-hand side there, we've got trees on a sunless slope. They cast really long shadows, but when you've got trees, and structures for that matter, on the sunny side, the shadows are shorter. So if you're thinking about village design, then I would probably dedicate the shady areas to forest. This is how you can preserve the solar access on a slope, by allowing the sun to be able to greet all of the slope. You plant your tall trees at the top so they're not casting shadow over the other trees. So if we wanted optimal, the best solar access for a site or a village, we would have low growing plants on the sunny side, and we would have the tall ones in the shade. In this little exercise, we're looking at a mountain from above. You can see there in the middle of the picture is a little mountain top, and the sun is on the right. So the morning shade is on the opposite side of where the sun would be coming. Then in the middle of the day, the shade has moved. As the sun has moved, it has moved to the left, to the west, and the shade has moved to the bottom there. This is for a southern hemisphere, by the way. And in the afternoon, the sun has moved again, and you've got shade where the morning sun was actually. When we combine the shadows, you can see that heavy shade sector below the mountain top there. Some things benefit from shade because it's cooling. What are the elements that you would have in the shade? I know, number one, I would be putting my fire shelter in the shade. And I would probably have a mushroom farm in the shade. Hi, I'm going to show you how light and shadow changes our perspective. When we're drawing, it's a very handy tool to use light and shadow. So I'm going to start sharing with you some of my work that I've been working on. I started out with a very simple line drawing. I wanted to make the illusion of undulating hills. I started out with this project for my nieces, actually. I wanted to make a quilt for them with like a permaculture village on it. And I wanted the landscape to be viewed from any angle and to just seem to be an endless landscape, so you could tile it. And I never did that project, and they're 7 years old now, so I don't know that it will ever happen in their childhood. Then I started to get to realize this was a really handy mindfulness type tool for teaching contouring. So I started to color it in on the computer, just fill with certain colors. I'm mindful at this point in time to make the hills that are far away fairly light and the hills that are closest to us darker. So you can see the ones on the horizon line are fairly light. If I wanted to make this even more realistic, I would blur them and I would bring the focus to the front. But remember, that particular landscape is going to be used for marking contours. So it needs to stay fairly clean. Then I got to this point where I started to put highlights in there, as in the sunlight. So up in the top right corner, you can see some light, which is I just chose a pale yellow and a paintbrush and put it in. And I've put it in at that same angle, the ridge of each of the mounds. But at this point, now I've decided to make 4 of the mounds a lake. Even though they're the same size, I'm going to show you how they can give the illusion of being flat or not a mound because they don't have the light continued on in the same way. After that, I realized, well, I'm going to have to stick some shade in on the opposite side of the mound. And so I started to do that. And then I wanted to put even more shade. So I use a burn tool. I'm just using Photoshop, not the very basic one, but certainly not for experts because I'm no expert. So there's no point in wasting money on that. I'm adding more and more shadow at this point with the burn tool. I'm starting to put some shadow into the lakes, the imaginary lakes, and perhaps adding a little bit more highlight would be where I need to go with this. And do you see those shadows really make it pop? It starts to look like a landscape now. So that's how you can use shadow to enhance your simple diagrams to the side of your permaculture plans. Have some fun. The kitchen herb spiral was created to try and put a lot of elements in a small space. It's great for an intensive garden. And it allows different heights and different levels of moisture and shade for the different plants in one small area. It's a great exercise in microclimates. My personal experience with the herb spiral was that it sort of got dominated by 1 or 2 plants. Perhaps I wasn't careful enough with my plant selection.
So we're here now today, and Amazon here is going to build an herb spiral, and you're going to do a course as well, which is going to be nice. We want to show it to you. Could you just maybe introduce it a little bit?
Yes, this element of herb spiral is typical for permacultural elements because it's multifunctional. It supplies herbs, spices, every spice you want on one place of about 2 or 3 square meters. This place is near to the kitchen, and so the cook can easily come in and get out.
Cut what he wants.
And yes, yeah.
So let's maybe finish with that, and we'll just have a look now at the course itself. And yeah, hope you enjoy it. And yeah, let's go for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
So have you been having
a good day today anyway.
Ein bisschen über natürlich. So.
Ist das so beschränkt? Ja, der ist jetzt besser.
Also gut, wenn das passt, dann ist das schön. Jetzt wollte ich mit dem noch ein bisschen. Das sehen wir wahrscheinlich.
Voll mit Stein.
Ja, jetzt noch einmal. Ja, warte, da müssen wir ein bisschen.
Sie bringt gerade den Treu etwas zum Helfen. Könnten wir eigentlich da eine Schubkarre dann reinmachen?
Oh, der sieht schön aus.
Haben wir gerade das hier.
Gut.
Vielleicht ein bisschen. Sein. Die da,
Hier sind auch 10 kleine.
also die Kalksteine würde ich gesagt, die kann man meistens lieber noch zerschlagen.
Wow, sind wir mit.
Ah, schön. Ah, ja, prima.
Freude herrscht.
Das ist sehr schön.
Platz noch.
Jetzt warte ich mal, was da noch für rauskommt. Und dann können wir hier überlegen, wie dann.
Wird spannend.
Ready, steady, go. Get your plans and run.
10, 9,
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 und go and get your plants.
Wer traut sich, die erste Pflanze zu nehmen?
Ja, ne?
Dann in dem Topf drin.
I'm really lucky that my own home is a little sun trap. I did design it that way, but that doesn't mean it's always going to work. A sun trap is a space that greets the sun because you know you can always create shade, but you can never create sunlight. So sun traps are protected from harsh winds. They've got some thermal mass that radiates warmth, and they reflect light. So I've got white walls in my sun trap. I've got some thermal mass in the decking wood and some of the pot plants that I have on the balcony. And also I was thinking, I wished that I had water tanks underneath my deck because that would actually be a brilliant thermal mass. Here is a view of Sydney Harbour. We're on the ferry and we're going towards the city. You can see the Opera House there. We're looking west. The buildings and the hills on the southern side of the harbour have effectively made a beautiful harbour because the wind is reduced. The water is calm where the ferry needs to dock. And there's reflected light for the buildings. And the buildings themselves have got thermal mass. They warm up as the sun heats the building. Of course, with global warming, this is not going to be useful. This is a negative thing. In New Mexico, I was on the train and we cut through a valley. It was an incredible dry landscape, but in this one little area, there was a beautiful sunny, green sun trap. In this very impoverished desert area, the river had actually gouged through and formed a bend. When the bend greets the sun like that, it's a natural sun trap. So there's housing, little houses along there, and beautiful lush fields. What you can do is you can create sun traps. The boulders provide thermal mass and some reflected light. But they've got nutrients as they erode. They've got the wind protection for the trees. And then over time, the mulch will fall and not be blown away. And you'll get some silt captured by the rocks as well. And condensation trapping. So you could create a sun trap with forests as well as structures. Here's a farm that's a little sun trap. You could have a sun trap village design.
Well, in order to protect the plants from severe cold in winter, and also to grow Japanese and African plants, what I did is created a microclimate, and we follow a policy of thinking smarter, not harder, and having 3 reasons to do anything. And this buildings across there in the water tanks have got more than 3 reasons. One, they provide a barrier from the car park on the other side to here. They provide a windbreak, but the morning sun, the east, the west and the northwest hit right across there, and the sun and the heat on the walls bounces back to keep these warm. And of course in summertime and wintertime we have heat in our sun, so therefore it's a very big value in autumn and winter as mainly. The other thing too is that we put a roof right across all these buildings, the shipping container, the function room, over, and that in turn fills 50,000 litres of water, which we use for the animals. So by building just that, we get the microclimate, a fence, a windbreak and a water collection.
Some sites don't get much sunlight in winter. Even my own site doesn't get sunlight until 10 a.m. and then it loses the sunlight about 2 p.m. That's known as a very narrow solar window. The last thing you want to do is block the sun in winter to a site that doesn't have much sun. So on this particular site in Otford, I've designed low plantings. North is actually to the left because of the strange narrow shape of the site. Normally you'd put north to the top. We've got these S-bends of continuous pathway through really low plantings, mixed perennial herbs and vegetable garden. That's what it would look like from looking from below. We're looking up to the house. Low herbage all the way so that we're not blocking the sun. About 10 years ago, I was an owner builder on our own home and we extended it into an L shape. And I'm so grateful it works. It works really well. We can sit, we have a little deck in the nook of the inside of that L shape. And it's a wonderful space to sit in winter in particular, and we just shade it in summer. There's my messy office on the right-hand side there. That's not my house on the left. That's the Otford property that I was designing for. But you can see how sunrooms and porches been in our culture for a long time. So when we have a solar passive site, we need to be fairly active in learning how to bring the warm air into the house and then shut it at the right time of the day. Another type of sun trap is known as a wallopini. Now here we've got some early sun pits, but that's with the use of glass and plastic. And I'm sure that wallopinis have been around a long time before glass or plastic. I think a wallopini traditionally, we don't have video and we don't have photos from these times, of course, but I would say traditionally it was probably a structure made with a lot of thermal mass and dug into a hillside that greeted the sun. Here you can see a picture of a vineyard inside a glass house. I've seen one like that in Berlin. They're actually in Berlin at the palace. One of the palaces in Berlin, they had like window frames on a wall for the grapevines.
Comanche pertenece a provincia Pacajes y provincia Pacajes pertenece al departamento de La Paz y La Paz pertenece a Bolivia. Nosotros somos aymaras. Nuestra cultura es estar con todos nosotros juntos, unidos y con nuestros animales y al lado de nuestras familias. Nosotros acá vivimos, como ve, a una altura 4000 sobre el nivel del mar. Es altiplano. Nosotros producimos acá papa al año una sola vez. También producimos quinoa, también al año una sola vez. Producimos también cañagua, igual, al año una sola vez. Pero no exportamos ni vendemos, solamente apenas para nuestro consumo. El tiempo es acá, empieza el viento, viene la granizada, viene la helada, en mejores momentos cuando está produciendo, nos quita. Empieza a llover diciembre, enero hasta febrero, 3 meses que llueve. En 3 meses nosotros tenemos que tratar de rescatar forraje y tener algo de animal que podemos optar o crear. Después viene el calor, no nos permite. A lo que hemos visto, a lo que yo he visto, Hualipini creo que es mucho mejor que carpa solar. Es nuevo sistema para nosotros. En este Hualipini creo rescatamos directamente el calor. Por ese calor da buena producción. y también ahorramos el agua. El techo es de plástico, entonces el plástico empieza a calentar, o sea, más temperatura aumenta. En la noche se mantiene eso, ya se reúne el calor bajo la tierra. Entonces pensamos que con Hualipini podemos producir mucho más allá. No solamente podemos producir forrajes, sino que también podemos producir alimentaciones para todos que nosotros acá vivimos. El Hualipini más o menos tenemos calculado que mínimamente nos va a costar $5.000. Para tener Hualipini nosotros damos como contraparte la mano de obra. Eso directamente viene a los beneficiarios de cada uno. Bueno, como malco originario, como autoridad originario, me gustaría que la comunidad sea la primera comunidad, que la asociación que tenga su propio Hualipini. Si así hay que construir Hualipini por 7 hectáreas, lo podemos hacer porque ya puede haber otro tipo de mejoramiento de forraje para animales y alimentación para seres humanos.
Trom walls work to store energy in the thermal mass. They're pretty amazing. You might like to check them out.
Cold air inside living spaces is replaced by warm air from the air gap that is exposed to direct sun rays on the south facade during daytime. Using the mobile thermal insulation, the goat wool curtains, and closing the wooden shutters help trapping the heat inside the rooms during nighttime. In summertime, the Trompy wall is used for increasing the airflow that enhances the cross-ventilation for cooling. At night, air movement is induced by warm air inside the Trompy wall air gap, sucking the cool outdoor air into the interior space.
Winters in Ladakh and Lahaul and Spiti are harsh. Temperatures often drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius at night. A solar wall is a simple and effective method to warm a room in the evening and night using solar energy. A solar wall is a thick south-facing masonry wall made of a material that absorbs a lot of heat. The best materials to build the wall are cement bricks, mud bricks, rammed earth, or cement hollow blocks filled with cement or mud. The wall is plastered and painted black on the south side. The outside surface is covered with a double glazed frame that has one or several windows. Sunlight passing through the glazing turns into heat when it hits the black wall. The wall heats up slowly during the day and retains the heat. It gives off its heat in the early evening into the living area when temperatures are cold. Step 1. The wall should be 1 foot wide. Put a wooden plank on top of the foundation. The width of the plank should be the same as the solar wall. The plank prevents direct contact of the solar wall with the foundation in order to prevent heat losses. If you live in a cold, dry area with low snowfall, use a wooden plank or compressed dung plaster. If you live in a cold area with high snowfall and humidity, do not use anything. Step 2. Position the window frame right in front of the wooden plank. Step 3. Build the side walls to anchor the window frame. Step 4. Fix a 1 foot wide and ½ inch thick strip of foam mattress on the left and right sides of the solar wall. Step 5. In a conventional Ladakhi wall, the bricks are placed in alternating directions. Do not use this method when building a solar wall. In a solar wall, all the rows of bricks should be placed in the same direction as the first row to prevent air gaps and ensure that the wall is 1 foot thick. Step 6. Fill the space between the bricks properly with mortar and make sure there are no air gaps. Air gaps will cause heat loss and reduce the performance of the solar wall significantly. For the same reason, there should be no gap between the solar wall and the window frame. Step 7. When the rows of bricks have the same orientation, it is difficult to make a neat edge where the bricks meet the window opening. Remember to keep all the bricks in the same direction. Step 8. Place the beams on top of the wall. Make sure the window frame and the solar wall have the same height so that the weight of the beams is distributed equally. Fix a wooden plank between the beams to cover the gap created by the beams on top of the solar wall. Fill the gap with wood shavings to avoid heat losses to the roof. Step 9. Plaster both sides of the solar wall with mortar or mud. Do not add straw or dung to the plaster, as these materials are insulators and will reduce the performance of the solar wall. Use black acrylic paint to paint the outer side of the solar wall. Black paint makes it absorb more of the sun's light and change it to heat. Step 10. Install double glass on the window frame. Double glazing works by trapping air between 2 panes of glass. This creates an insulating barrier. Since glass expands with heat, cut the glass panes 1 millimeter smaller than the frame, otherwise it will break when it expands in the heat. Apply glass putty on the 4 edges of the glass pane. The putty stops the leakage of air around the glass and prevents it from resting directly against the wood. Clean the glass on both sides before installation. Dust and dirt hamper the solar wall performance by decreasing the amount of light that comes in. Insert the glass pane into the frame carefully. Press it firmly to distribute the putty. Nail a wooden batten to create a gap between the glass panes. The gap should be between ½ inch and 1½ inches. Install the second glass pane in the same way and fasten it with wooden battens. Step 11. The window sill and its sides have to be insulated to prevent thermal bridges. The best way is to apply a 1-inch layer of extruded polystyrene, locally called thermocol. Make a wooden frame to hold it and cover it with 6 mm plywood. If no polystyrene is available in your area, use a 19mm wooden plank or 6mm plywood. Fix the wood to the wall using nails or screws. If no wood is available at all, apply 1 to 2 inches of plaster mixed with dung or straw for insulation. You can also build the solar wall first and fix the window frame later. The order makes no difference in performance. In this video, the window frame was installed first. Although at first sight they look alike, do not confuse a solar wall with a trombe wall. A trombe wall has vents on the top and bottom of the wall to transfer warm air to the room. Also, it has a 4 to 6 inch air gap between the wall and the window frame to allow more air circulation. Although a trombe wall can be slightly more energy efficient than a solar wall, it requires the user to be very active and to do rigorous maintenance. First, to close the vents at night, and secondly, to keep the glass clean. Otherwise, it can be less energy efficient. A trombe wall is recommended for bathrooms. A solar wall is simpler to use. These are some front views of solar walls adapted to different room sizes. The number and size of windows and openings depends on the size of the room and the amount of light desired. The red frames are double-glazed windows that can be opened for ventilation. The blue squares are fixed double glass panes to let light in.
The idea of combining and integrating the chicken house with a greenhouse is a great idea, but it needs a lot of management because chickens are not great with a lot of humidity, although they did come from the rainforest. They can also get overheated if we're looking at, with the global warming, if we're looking at temperatures over 45. It's not great for chickens. So I have a friend who has 2 chicken houses, helps manage the pests and disease. He has a summer house and a winter house. I think this could be a good idea for the winter house. As you know, cold air sinks, and cold air in the Wallapini needs to go somewhere. In this particular design by Stephen Jones, you can have a cold sink, which is actually a trough where the cold air can pool and maybe even sink away from the structure. A sun trap could include the housing, but you could also have rotation, so chickens move from one section to another section. Here's an earthship plan we did for chickens to live in a cold climate. Some places on Earth are just too hot to grow anything. And so in the deserts, a lot can be grown in a courtyard and underground. On Easter Island, there were many underground gardens. I'm not sure if that was just because of the fear of invasion from other tribes or because it was to escape the wind. Easter Island wasn't always treeless. It was because it was overpopulated and not well managed that it became treeless. If you've got a sunless slope, my mum has a sunless slope, then every stream of sunlight needs to be well managed. So in summary, you need to manage a sun trap, but it can be regulated naturally with deciduous plants. We can always create shade, but we can't create sunlight. So let's move on to wind. Air is an amazing resource. Basically, we want to remember that when it's moving, it cools down. When it's still, it can heat up. But it does actually start to move because warm air starts to rise. It's quite self-regulating. When it is really calm, it's a great insulator. A windbreak is like a living fence. It can block, filter, or channel air. You can make it quite dense, or you can make the windbreak quite flexible. On the good side, the windbreak prevents moisture loss because you've got less air travelling over a site because of the windbreak blocking or filtering the air. So you've got less moisture blown away. You can have warmer air because of that. And that can be a better habitat for animals if it's in a cool climate. If it's in a hot climate, then you might want to set up some windbreaks that funnel the air to particular areas that need the highest stream of wind flow. Because wind flow helps to cool a house or a pond or a plant. And if you have too much wind breakage, right, you're going to have less pollination in some instances. Some things like corn needs a little bit of wind. You can actually have more fungi settling on the plants, like vines need a little bit of air movement to keep them from getting too humid. And the windbreaks can cause a bank of frost build up. So you can use windbreaks to channel frost. Generally speaking, during the night, the air cools and it sinks, and during the day, it rises. So I live in a village and I can feel the air goes down through the creek line, and then in the morning, it starts to come back up. I'm lucky in a way that takes the frost away, takes it to my lower neighbours' properties. But if I wanted to grow cherries or something like that, I would actually need that chill. If you go camping on a fairly open site, when it's not too windy, you can experience this thing called the thermal belt. You don't actually have to go camping, you can just go walking around in the night. If you walk around, you'll start to feel, as I'm going uphill, this is actually getting warmer. And then if you go a bit further uphill, it can get colder. So the thermal belt is pretty complicated, but it's worth learning where the thermal belt is in a hillside, because you don't want to be living below it or above it. If you can live right on the thermal belt, you'll have less negative effects on the property. And now we're moving on to frost. So those plants that need a bit of chill are probably the ones that are going to be lost with global warming. If you need to move the frost, then treat it a bit like heavy water and find a place for it to drain away. In an orchard situation, they actually put out lots of little fires and in the orchards to keep the frost from settling on there and damaging the trees. The next aspect about a microclimate is humidity. If you have some humidity, then you've got more moisture in the plants, more surface water, and the insects and some of the animals will love it. The downside of humidity is that you can have less pollination because the flowers just don't want to open. You can have more fungi, mold, and wood rot. Now let's move on to thermal mass. The beauty of thermal mass. Well, thermal mass can be in rocks and mountains, cliffs and structures, ponds and the ocean. But actually, one of the amazing thermal masses is wood. It's pretty adaptable. A tree will actually change the temperature around it through thermal mass and through its ability to suck up moisture and to let moisture out. Structures like this one use a lot of thermal mass to prevent the sun from getting onto the living areas. So the windows are small, and they, over time, over the season of the summer season, they heat up. They do heat up. Once they get hot inside, they're really, really hard to cool down again. The French were in love with pears. I think they had 800 types of pears. Here you can see how they're using rock walls to behave as windbreaks, but also thermal mass for the pears. This great big fireplace has another one inside actually, and you can almost feel like you're sitting inside the fireplace. It absorbs the heat over the whole winter season, starts to heat up. But in summer, when there's no fire on, it was lovely and cool. When you build a slab on earth and you make sure that the slab is in contact with the earth, it's called earth coupled. And that way, the slab stays at the temperature of the earth, which is always between 16 and 19 degrees Celsius. You might need to insulate the edges of this slab so that the energy and the warmth in the slab is not lost. And you can see above that, this design allows the winter sun, which is lower in the sky, to penetrate, to come right through to the back of the slab. But with eaves over the top of the window, the summer sun, which is really high in the sky, its angle doesn't get into the house. Now, the last factor to consider from microclimate is the general climate of the area. So you've got your natural climate from your longitude and your latitude. And then you've got external influences such as geothermal and pollution. They're the main. Some areas in the world have more volcanic activity than other areas. And so some places actually can have geothermal heating. The heat from the volcanoes help to heat the homes. That includes Iceland, New Zealand, and some parts of Canada. But some areas also have accidental ground heat. Not far from me, actually, is an area where the children can't run around at school barefoot because it's too hot on their feet. There is an underground fire. One of the oldest coal seam fires known to man is the Burning Mountain near Sydney. Apparently it was started by an Aboriginal man who was just putting up a campfire, but it could have been started by lightning. The shape of a landscape actually affects the climate. When you go up a mountain, you can feel the difference. You might be a bit hot from the exercise, but it should be cooler up the top of the mountain than down below in the valley, not just because there's shade in the valley, but because the mountain is higher. Yet at high altitude, so high up the mountain, you're going to have higher radiation. So a lot of factors are going on with altitude. You've got extremes of temperature. If you stay up the mountain, you're also going to feel colder at night. In winter, you can be colder up the mountain than down in the valley, but that can often be because of wind. The climate also affects the shape of the landscape. When we're looking at rolling hills, it usually means it's a humid landscape. When we look at jagged peaks, it usually means because it's arid and the wind and the rain has harshly affected that landscape. Let's return to the idea of a thermal belt. The thermal belt occurs because there's an inversion that forms in a valley. The cold air has sunk, and that's kind of pulled down this warmer air from above, and there's a little trapped pocket of warm air. Do you know where the thermal belt is on your property or in your area? So in summary, these 6 factors contribute to your design for microclimates. I'm really excited to tell you that by using these theories, I was able to grow tropical fruits at 90 meters above sea level in a warm temperate area. I've got jackfruit, and I've had jackfruit here now fruiting for about 10 years, and I'm really convinced it's because we set up a good microclimate for it. I hope you can do the same.